We've got a number of okay. Love technology. No, I mean, this is always a special thing of getting some speakers to come in to inspire us, to educate us, and just to share, glimpses into their world. And I've been blessed to have known Jenks for at least 20 years now. I think back in the days when I was at the Ralston Arboretum, I remember Adrian and I think we were still dating at the time, botanizing along the Congaree River and the Broad and the Saluda, looking at cool plants in the wild. But just, Jenks's background is, so widely diverse of, I think Clemson was horticulture, and then a master's in museum sciences focused on public horticulture. Okay. I get so flustered. But with that background of, growing up in the Deep South, what generation farm? 10th generation farmer. Leaving the South, going to, the University of Washington for his master's, then coming back home. And if you have not read his book, The Garden Disruptors, it's that story of him coming back to the South to start Riverbanks Botanical Garden. And the story of bringing this amazing crew together that was so varied in their backgrounds. I think the thing that stood out to me out of that book was just how gardens can bring people together, even in the divisive times that we live in now, how gardens can be that bond. I still remember, getting in trouble in high school and my dad wasn't talking to me, and it wasn't until plants came up that we started talking again. So it's those amazing things that gardens can do. And Jenks, did that with creating riverbanks, also crafting the vision to create more farms down in Lake City, South Carolina. And then moving on to other, different ventures between having his own farm that specializes in crinum, being an amazing garden designer, amazing garden writer, amazing garden, everything, but just also one of the nicest damn people you'll meet. It's my pleasure to introduce Jenks Farmer to demystify a few things for us today.
Thank you, John. Thanks, all. I have several things I want to do before I get into the meat of this discussion is about meadows and how a lot of people want meadows, and there are a lot of memes about meadows and how much easier it is to have a meadow than a lawn. Some of those are myths that I want to address, but I also want to give you some techniques for making it easy and making it work. So if you do decide to have a meadow, then you have some ways that work. I've been making meadows for 30 years. The very first one I did was extremely controversial. It was at a women's college called Columbia College. And the college knew it was going to be controversial, and they did really great PR to help ease people into it. So in the campus where we were working, they did big posters. This was 30 years ago, so it wasn't like all this technology. There were literally big sandwich posters that explained things. They had the local newspaper, the campus newspaper, interview me and talk about the plants and the goals. And it was still controversial, but having a realistic understanding of what a meadow is and what a meadow can do and how much work they are is kind of where I come up with this whole idea that getting a meadow is kind of like getting a puppy. Like, you have to train, and that means training you as much as the puppy. But a couple of things I'd like to do is tell you first how to get in touch with me. Our website is my name, jenksfarmer.com. You can find me on Substack and Facebook and all those places. The other thing I want to do is tell you that this is my very first talk that kind of goes along with this brand new book. The book's been shipping for about 10 days, and our shipping department, which is my husband Tom around the corner, has been in charge of that. So this lecture, I have a couple of things that are kind of trial runs, things that I've never done in a presentation. So I hope y'all will bear with me. And if you have a comment about whether they work or not, I would really appreciate it, because I'm doing this in Clemson in 10 days, and it'll be kind of the same thing. But the most important thing that we do today is tell you how beautiful that garden is across the street. So for staff and volunteers and supporters, congratulations, because I've been all over the Southeast since March, and yesterday, like late afternoon, walking through that garden was really joyful. It was full of flowers, obviously, and insects, and I saw some people walking a cat on a leash. The conservatory, the last time I saw it, it was completely in construction, and this is a photo from yesterday. That place is stunning. I think that's one of the best collections of globa, dancing girls, ginger, that I have ever seen. So this is kind of the outline for what we're going to do today. My two myths that can lead to failure in gardening in general. Those are kind of my test points that I'd really like your comments on. And then as we get into a big project that we've been working on for about 5 years, a big meadow project down on Pawleys Island, South Carolina. We'll look at design tips, different perennials, grasses, and we have a very sad meadow story too. This myth number one is something I hear a lot of people say, and I've highlighted here the important part. Because they are monocots, they lack the vascular cambium necessary for root growth. Well, that's true for palms, and that's why you see palms shipped with those sort of bare nubs and no roots. Because if you cut those roots on a palm, they are not gonna rebranch, right? They're only gonna send new roots from the base of the palm. But this is an AI problem as well as a myth problem. It's not true for a whole lot of other monocots. Monocots being grasses, right? You all know if you cut a grass root and plant it, it's going to be just fine, and you're going to get lots of new root growth. So again, works for palms, but this kind of a generalization happens too often and can really lead to failure, because if you read that and you think, oh, my grasses are monocots, I don't need to do anything to their roots, you're going to end up with stunted grasses. The same goes for crinums, and one of my favorite grasses. Can y'all grow this one? Is it a little cold here? So Muhlenbergia dumosa, I just think the movement on that grass is just stunning, and that thing will grow in the middle of an asphalt parking lot. My sort of passion and my obsession is crinum lilies, and I have to claim that I've cut and dug and planted more crinum lilies than most people in the South. And I can tell you that that monocot branches out beautifully when you cut the roots. Do you see what I'm saying? Y'all see all the tiny little white roots? Okay, so again, if I were to cut all of those roots off because I was transplanting or starting a new garden, would it hurt the plant? Would it live? Yes. No, it would not particularly hurt the plant. It would live, but it would set it back. So in our nursery, we don't ship crinums like completely bare root like you might see in amaryllis that comes in the wintertime. The big point with this, though, is that the AI overviews are wrong. Not always. I'm sure whatever your field is, you can find an AI overview that is wrong, or at least a big generalization. So avoid those like you avoid myths. I did hear an awesome podcast recently. Margaret Roach, who's a writer for the New York Times, she did a podcast on how to evaluate garden information online. And her podcast is called A Way to Garden. The other myth, and so many people think this, that stuff in the nursery pot is good stuff.
You say, put that good stuff in the hole. Well, stuff in the hole. I'm not exactly sure what you think is good stuff. Well, it's good that you recognize that I know what's the good stuff.
This client that I work with all the time says, put that good stuff in the hole. The point is, nurseries, and I'm a nursery, are not thinking about transition to your garden. When we're growing in containers, we're thinking about how that plant looks in that container. And the stuff that goes in the plant, the potting soil, is not always great stuff. I don't know if you can tell here, but can y'all tell that this is really dry and this is really wet? Every plant that I plant, I pre-water, and if I possibly can, I soak that plant, because that is the only way to get a lot of nursery mix wet. Now, for y'all, you have a heavier soil that holds more water, right? I'm working in sand, so my plants have to have good soil contact and have to be wet when they go in the ground, because it's like an old ashtray where we work, that sandy stuff. A lot of the potting soils today are mostly bark. And again, it's not a bad thing from the nursery standpoint, but it's not necessarily a good thing for you and your transplanting. So when I transplant shrubs, this is what I do to them. I almost bare root them. Another issue with that is that nurseries are often thinking more about whether that plant's going to stand up when it's windy than whether or not it's planted at the right depth. So this is a tree that I got from a very good nursery in Raleigh. And this was an expensive, this was a $75 2-gallon tree. That's how it looked when I got it. That's how much topsoil I took off of it to get to where it really should be. And the little mnemonic that I learned in college, it's so important, is show us your flare. So with woody plants, you want to see that little bit of a flare at the ground. And often in nursery plants, no matter the size, you see it looks just like a pencil going down into the pot, right? Because there's too much soil on top of that, the true top of the roots. Does that make sense? This is what that can lead to. So this tree, this is a live oak tree. This is actually a live oak that I brought in a massive pot, like piano-sized pot. This was an $8,000 tree, and it came 4 inches too deep. And so if you, if you had paid for this, if you had a landscaper putting this in, you got to be out there a lot of times saying, hey, check, where's the root flare? So we had to take that 4 inches off. But even so, this tree had grown in the nursery too deep. And you end up with this area of rotted bark that makes it susceptible to pests. And in the worst case, sometimes that soil is so tight around the trunk that the trunk above ground will expand, but that trunk part below ground won't. And so that tree is always susceptible to snapping off. Myth number 3, we're going to get into today. I don't know that this is really a myth, but maybe a simplification. Like, who wouldn't agree with this? What, is there a golf course guy here? Because you might disagree. There are people who want a perfect lawn. I'm not one of them. I do happen to like lawns, but not perfect lawns. But this kind of thing causes strife and arguments in the horticulture world, and it's a simplification that's hard to defend, I guess. We all want diversity, but having a lawn doesn't mean you have to have a monoculture. So in the book, I have a whole chapter on eco-friendly lawns. I saw a beautiful lawn today that the woman said, "Oh, I think we have to get rid of this and put down turf because there's moss growing and there's creeping Charlie." I'm like, "No, that's awesome. Like, you have this beautiful mosaic of textures." So those are my 2 sort of trial run myths. And I'm going to try to tie them in as we go into meadow making. The primary places that I've worked are coastal plain South Carolina. So we live our farm is right near Augusta, Georgia, 2 hours from the coast, but still relatively flat. We're at about 400 feet. What's our elevation here? Anybody know? 900 feet? Y'all need to know that. 2,000? No. Could that be? What? Oh, good. Look at you. So if you look on this map, you see that elevation change. So I want you to remember that as I talk. The plants that I'm talking about are coastal plain plants, and the techniques that we use are specifically for our soils. And that's incredibly important for new people who are just coming to the South to understand that even though it doesn't look all that different from growing, and the plants and the ways that you grow are really different in all parts of the South. So we're going to look at Pawleys Island. This is a project that we've been working on since before COVID. This is about a 4-acre garden. It's a private compound with 3 houses, and it's on the marsh, not on the beach. So if you look near me, you see where it says marsh. And we're going to look at, we're going to look at number 1 and we have 2 number 2s. We're going to look at the number 2 out by the marsh. This is what it looked like when we started, kind of like the Haunted Mansion at the Disney, full of a plant that I never will use again, that Asiatic jasmine.
4,
Oh, you don't have to.
7,
That's
8
just
windmill palms that could be moved.
Sorry, those are just my notes to myself. So full of Asiatic jasmine, which was like literally pulling down trellises around the house. In this middle of the garden, from where I'm looking here, where you're looking, if you turn right around, you saw this. And I didn't love this. Now, some of you might love this. No judgment. To me, it had a number of problems. One is that it was too much, like too complicated. And the mermaid just wasn't working. But the main problem I had with this, really from a construction standpoint, this is probably a $20,000 fountain. So the clients were like, "Well, you can just push it down." I'm like, "No way." It's like, we got to figure out how to use that and make it beautiful. But the main problem I had was with proportion of that tiny little ball on top. To me, it was just like, what can we do about that? So I'm going to show you what we did. Maybe. All right, y'all, hold on, we're stuck. So we really simplified it. it made it look bigger. We did buttermilk to make it moldy. We took off that entire top and turned that into a planter. And I think it really worked. So I was really proud of this. You might have gotten a little glimpse of the marsh in those videos. So this is the view from the client's house, but also from many parts of this garden. The problem here is that it just, from a design standpoint, it just went from a mown edge to a marsh, and it was constantly flooding. We wanted something to delineate it. What I would love to have done was to bring the marsh way in, but these are people who give big parties and want space for tents. So they needed this big lawn. This is when we were working, we just camped. My crew and I camped a lot on site, which was awesome because it helped us understand the lay of the land. So along that marsh line is where we did a 10-foot wide, and I can't remember how many yard long meadow, but a really long meadow. So our first goal was tilling. I don't always till. In fact, I don't like to till a lot of times, but we just wanted to delineate this. We had 8,000 little plants that would go in, and we also mixed in woodies, because our southern meadows are not generally not just like, you know, some alpine meadow with only wildflowers. Tom and I grow a lot of plants in cocoa pots, and that helps us avoid some of the root issues that I talked about earlier. Every plant here got watered the night before planting, because we were staying on site, the morning of planting in their pots, and they were hand watered after planting. And that, even without an irrigation system, with that much water and using that hand watering to compact the soil around the little plants, we got about 90% take, 90% success. Now this did eventually get an irrigation system about the middle of the summer. Everything you're seeing happened last winter, and the after pictures you'll see are just through probably May. Every single plant, every single grass, even though they're monocots, got cut 2 times all the way through. So that would stimulate new root growth. And again, everyone got hand planted and then hand watered. And this is kind of what it looked like. This is probably about May. This is probably about April. And a little video on a stormy night. You see some of the oak trees that we put in. So a lot of the color that you see is annual color, and that annual color is added for 1 season only. And I'm going to talk about what some of those plants are. But primarily, this is perennials and grasses, and everything here was meant to be under about waist high. One of my favorite little plants, Phlox pilosa. We use this here at the conservatory, and it's looking, if you look at it at the conservatory now, it's basically summer dormant. So it's kind of looking like it's supposed to look, which is not very good this time of year. So a few tips for doing these kinds of gardens: separate your grasses from your perennials. This is from a maintenance standpoint. It just makes it easier to weed. And if you're going to use herbicides, you can use selective herbicides. So what that means is there are herbicides that you can spray on grasses that will kill the broadleaf weeds, and there are herbicides you can spray on broadleaf perennials that will kill the unwanted grasses. Does that make sense? Also separate sedges, because the same is true for sedges and grasses. If you're going to use herbicides, you use specific herbicides to these different kinds of plants. I saw this yesterday at Renolda. I thought this was a really beautiful planting. This is a little Carax, and Carax is actually a sedge. So, you know, it takes a little bit of research, not AI overview, but to figure out, like, is this plant that looks like a grass or a sedge? Mow frames are incredibly important. That was done really well here in the big meadow here at Renolda. In this case, we did some really big mow frames. So you can see to the right, it's about a 20-foot section that isolates this meandering perennial border. Incredibly important for meadows because you're relying on plants to seed in, is to learn seedling ID. And that just takes a long time. There are good Google sites for this. You know, I'm not like opposed to technology. I just want to be wary of it. And I have an awesome book. I don't know if it's still available. Parks Seed had a book on all of their seeds, and I had pictures of all of their plants as they came in different stages. So some of the plants that we use a lot, penstemon, we use a Sandhills variety, multiflorus. It's probably not, is it okay? It may hate this soil, but there are plenty of penstemon that do fine here. Guara, I use a lot. Guara, you know, to be very technical, Guara is not a Carolina native. You see it sold in native sections, but it's really a Gulf Coast native. Starry rosinweed is one of my favorites. It's just coming into flower right now. It's like a little golden sunflower that's about maybe chest high. And then a lot of sweetgrass. The phlox that I told you about earlier, this is obviously in a different garden. Pilosa, it's one of my favorites because it just kind of runs everywhere and it's summer dormant. So all kinds of other things can grow across it in the summer and it doesn't care and it'll come back and flower beautifully. I've only have 2 grasses listed, sweetgrass, and in a different garden, we did a lot of a little panicum called Cape Breeze. A lot of switch grasses get way too big and they lodge in a thunderstorm. So they'll grow up head high and then there's so much weight that they just lay over. But Cape Breeze stays about waist high. So this is it in the wintertime. And it'll stand up like that all the way through the winter. So that's basically a synopsis. Are there any questions about that meadow? There were 2 of them. There were live oaks. They were massive, but you saw the scale of this house. We just had to. I mean, I don't like to do big tree transplanting because unless you have somebody there who's really, talk about adopting a puppy. I mean, there are so many things that can go wrong with a big tree, and a big tree is often the first thing you put in, but then you do all of this stuff on top of it. So if it dies and you have to replace it, it's like a real mess. But those 2 went on either side of the house just to try to bring some scale down to that. Nothing. There was nothing I can do, and that it was about 3/4 of that was fine, and I think it'll heal over. We have in this garden, the big meadow that I just showed you. There's a landscape crew who does basic maintenance. And then there's a horticulturalist who's a full-time horticulturalist at Brook Green Gardens. And he's kind of my guy in the field. He knows exactly what to do. And he does the deadheading. He does the fine gardening that it takes to keep things like that alive, but also to keep this meadow looking great. Because I'm 3 hours away from this project. It's not somewhere I can just ride by and say, hey, you know, you got Florida Bethany coming up, jump on it. So the meadows that I've shown you, and like the meadow here, they don't have a lot of annuals in them, and I don't want them to have a lot of annuals in them because I want them to be so thick that they are obscuring light and preventing a weed population. But in the first season, I do a lot of seeding in. And then there's another kind of meadow, which is just an annual meadow. And those are often not true. They're not true meadows. They're more like wildflower gardens. So I'm going to go into a couple of those and the plants that we use. One of my favorite little plants ever since I was a kid was this field flax. And if you drive around anywhere rural in the Carolinas in late March and April, you'll see fields of this. It's the most killer plant because it looks like you could run into it and like float on it. But then when you get into it, it's not there. You know, it's only beautiful in a mass at a certain level when you look across it. But the sparseness of it is always amazing. You can't get that native field flax seed. So I have in the past collected seed and grown my own and used it, but instead I use this Asian species, Linaria reticulata, which I get from wildseedfarms.com. It is almost time to seed this in. This is my #1 cheerful, joyous little plant to seed into any garden. Meadow gardens, pots, tiny perennial gardens. This thing is awesome. You seed it in the fall and you get this, it's the same sort of ephemeral look, but it has a mix of pastel colors. It does not come back, so you have to seed it every year. Now, we also do a lot of tillage radish, which is a agricultural plant that's used to break up soils in fields. This is on our farm. I'm going to show you pictures of our farm later, but this is I think this is early May. Lots and lots of big flowers, and I think the white makes it not look like it doesn't look like a mustard weed, you know. And on top of that, it has these delicious little seed pods, which are kind of like little snap peas, but they're taste like radish. Another one that I use a lot, that's kind of a perennial, is Abelmoschus or Manihot. I call this showy okra because it's actually an okra. We leave the seeds standing through the winter, but this one will come up on soils that have not been tilled. So like on a highway right away, we actually collected about 6 pounds of this recently for somebody who was working on a right of way. And then for summer, you just can't beat the plains coreopsis. They come in all different colors. Again, my go-to source is wildseedfarms.com, and they'd sell little packets or they sell 5-pound bags. They're a Texas grower. This was on our farm last year. This is one of those annual meadows that's strictly done for one season. So when we have, this was for April, we have a lot of garden tours. And so we're full of coreopsis, cosmos, zinnias, and you see the Abelmoschus or the showy okra. And then all of that gets mown down and it's done. I hesitate to call that a meadow because it's more like a flower display, just with a looser style. About 5 years ago, there's a date on there. I was asked by this big developer. Is anybody a developer here? Good. I don't trust them. He said, we have this big project. It was the most visible, heaviest traffic intersection in Columbia. And we went to the High Line in New York, and we want our entry to look just like the High Line. So I sat down with him and I said, here's the deal. You can't have it look like the High Line. We can do an approximation of that. That's, southern plants, but the maintenance of it is going to be like the maintenance of the High Line. And I gave him, we literally did a color pamphlet with all the plants and some maintenance issues. We did this big plan. We had a pretty diverse planting. And let's see, about 18 months in, I got a call from the mayor. Now, I am not like connected. I don't know the mayor. The mayor doesn't know me. About 5:45, I got this call, and he was like, this woman said, this is the mayor's office. Mayor Benjamin wants to talk to you right now. He said, the WIS News is going down there, and they're going to trash that project, and you need to get down there right now and try to defend it, because this is our city, and we want our city to be known as a beautiful city, and you know the rest of the conversation. So I went down there, and this is what, this was a news segment.
Is it a beautiful garden or a patch of weeds? Turns out, it depends on your perspective.
People look at this and don't understand.
Jenks Farmer is the brains behind the so-called natural garden that greets visitors to the budding Bull Street district. Farmer says what you see is just like the latest fashion or a piece of modern art. It requires explanation. What you see here is a sustainable, eco-friendly garden.
It requires no extra water, no synthetic fertilizers, no toxic chemicals.
We took the debate to Columbia's Main Street. Take a look at this picture and tell me, is that a garden or is that weeds?
In my opinion, I see weeds.
I see weeds.
Yeah, that needs some help. That needs some help.
Now that's pretty weedy to me.
Yeah, it's not much of it.
All right, you don't need to see the rest of it. I don't need to hear it again. The next day, the developer sent somebody down. He said, we really want this to look more like the parking lot at the Lizard's Thicket, which is, Lizard's Thicket is a local restaurant chain. And I was like, well, then you need to hire the guy that does the Lizard's Thicket. So not only was it depressing, but it was a lot of money that they wasted on that. And I really think the problem was the lack of interpretation that I mentioned in the beginning. With today's technology, this should have been all over social media before it turned into that. There should have been plant profiles and insect profiles, and this is why this is good. This is why this is helpful. This is why we want to bring nature to our cities, but none of that happened. And the first public exposure of this was that news segment that got shared. Wait, that wasn't supposed to happen. It was supposed to happen, but I'm going to change topics here. Are there any Meadow questions before I go on? Is anybody going to make a Meadow? You have a Meadow? Yes, we do mow our perennial meadows. A lot of meadows would have been maintained by fire in the southeast. And of course, we can't do that in most urban situations. So we mow, and we're selective about it. we'll decide this year it really needs it. Some years it doesn't need it. Some years you have to mow and take away all that thatch, which I think you just did here. Not only, I mean, they mowed the big meadow here and baled and took that away so they didn't end up with a giant thatch layer. You don't want to mow. If you constantly mow, then you end up with a grass dominated meadow. So you have to be selective about it. And y'all, I want to make sure I'm not being too hard on meadows. I love doing them. And like I said, I've done them, for 30 years. I just want you to know, especially if you're thinking about making one, or if you sit on a board of, say, a park or a neighborhood group where someone says, let's make a meadow. I want you to have realistic understanding of what that means so that it is done as a success. Any other meadow questions? Yes.
You said on the slide, it said something about using pre-emergent herbicide. How does that work if you're with timing, if you're doing this as seed?
Then you can't do it, right? So then, yeah, so there is no recipe for one successful recipe for a meadow. So it kind of depends on your weed pressure, like that coastal meadow, because we had really worked that soil and I had been watching it for years. I wasn't worried about our weed pressure. The wild plants all around us were salt marsh. They weren't going to seed into this higher ground, so I wasn't worried about that. So we didn't do pre-emerge on that. And also, I'll say, our farm is completely organic, and I don't like to use a lot of herbicides, but there are times that I just have to get the desired effect, especially when I'm not going to be at a project. Yes. Nope. Okay. Well, I kind of ruined my next quiz here. Does anybody know who the most famous son of Beach Island, South Carolina is? There you go. James Brown, he came to our church when I was little, occasionally. We have another famous son who now I'd have to say is an infamous son. His name was James Henry Hammond. And if you've read the newest Eric Larson book, there are 2 chapters on the evils of James Henry Hammond. He was a local planter, and I don't know, he was a local nut, but he was a very good farmer. And our farm is literally at the end of a magnolia lane from what became his farm. So those are probably the 2 most famous people. We are neither a beach nor an island. We're named because it was apparently Beach Highlands, because as you leave Augusta, Georgia, and cross the river, Augusta is all flat and floodplain, but Beach Island sits up on cliffs, about 60-foot cliffs that are covered in cypress and beech trees. It's a real odd forest combination. So it was Beach Islands. We are, enough. I'm so sorry, y'all. Here we are. This is how I grew up. This is about turn of the century. The house is 1750s. When we moved in, this is how it looked in the 1970s. It had been basically let go for about 20 years. Actually, our family did not have anything to do with this land. This is not a family farm. My dad bought it because he wanted us to grow up and not know that Myrtle Beach existed in the world. So we grew all of our own food, chickens, hogs, cows, vegetables. And we spent the first 5 years clearing out seriously invasive species. And I loved it. My sister, she's still mad. But if you look in the background to give you a better idea of the shape of the house, there was a pallet on the back door to keep chickens out. It was all wood heat. It still is all wood heat. And it has been renovated. This is the barn. When Tom and I took over when my dad died, and it was in this shape because he had been sick for a long time and it had really gone downhill. And this is what it looks like today. So we are primarily a crinum nursery, but we do all kinds of big bulbs, amaryllis, pineapple lilies, sometimes blood lilies, you know, all kinds of stuff like that. If it comes in a bulb, we try it. This is what it looked like after Helene. We were in the eye of the storm, and this is actually not us. This was Redcliffe. This is the Hammond home, which is now a state park. But we're still cleaning up. We lost the roof of 2 barns. We lost our greenhouse roof, and we have a fence line that we just hadn't even gotten to. But, you know, now we have sunny places to grow, and it's a family operation. This is my mom, who turned 89 this week. I called her yesterday, and she said, I did all the work you left me to do. She said, I potted up 97 cabbage. Like, awesome. Like, you know, she's 89. And I didn't have anything really important for her to do. So if we end up with 97 cabbage this year, we're going to eat a lot of coleslaw. We have been in a lot of magazines, which has helped with the reputation of crinum lilies, because they used to have a pretty bad reputation as being sort of country and poverty plants. The magazines make us look a little glossy and a little chic, but this is the reality of life on our farm. This is my mom and my niece, we've just hired, so she's just come on to the garden team. But our farm really does not look like a flower farm very often. It looks more like a meadow or something really weedy going wild. We're 100% no-till. It hadn't been tilled since my dad was no-till too, so it hadn't been tilled since the 70s. We use all kind of plants for soil work, like crimson clover for nitrogen, tilling radish for tilling, sun hemp for nitrogen. And this is what we grow, and that's what we sell, big bulbs. I want to address one more myth before I bring this to a close, or one more. I think a simplification is a better way to say this. I see this passed around on Facebook too often, and it's just not true. Most birds are generalists, and they can eat caterpillars that eat all kinds of plants. Most caterpillars are generalists. So again, this is the kind of thing that sows division. It makes people angry and argue, when most of the time, all of those people are really on the same page. And one of my biggest goals, one of my beliefs that I think most of you share in this room, we have scarred this earth, and we continue to do it. And the most important thing we can do is to put our minds to getting things that grow and things that are helpful and things that don't cause harm. A little example, we have a caterpillar that is a pest of all amaryllids. So this is an American caterpillar eating my African crinums. Doesn't care that they're African, eats them right down to the ground. And when we first got these, because they're relatively new in our inland, they've been on our coast a long time. I was like, oh, well, maybe the birds will just eat them. But that coloration on that caterpillar tells birds, like, don't eat me. And if a bird does eat it, it has a really awful taste. so the birds spit them out. So I just think this is really weird. Why is an American caterpillar eating an African crinum? And then when it grows up, we call it a Spanish moth. Like, the relationships are so intimate and they need so much research and so much study. I'm trained as a scientist, and I read and respect science greatly, but I'm also an observer, and I am outside. I've been outside for coming on 60 years. And those observations that I make and you make are really valuable. And I just want you to value them and to learn how to test them against research and against how to use Google to test our observations and decide if they're sometimes simplifications that we've come to, or they're sometimes truths that maybe hadn't been proven through science yet. The one thing that I'm most proud of in my career is that I had mentors. I grew up in the country. We were the only kids around, so we grew up with old people, and they taught us to look and to observe and to play. And in my career, I've always had interns, and I'm super proud. This is my nephew. That we have interns on our farm, we have interns in our design work, and we have been able to stimulate and teach a whole lot of young people. This was our crew this past summer, and we would love for y'all to come and visit us. We do have, y'all could do like a bus tour. Thank you very much.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, Pearl is an old friend of mine. Where did I miss that? No, he was with Pearl. So everybody knows who Pearl Fryer is. Nobody not? You don't? Pearl Fryer in the middle. I wrote about Pearl in my Garden Disruptors book. When I met Pearl, I went to his place, and all these people had said, "You got to go see Pearl Fryer. You got to go see Pearl Fryer." Who is she? And I showed up, and here's this big, beautiful black man that comes bounding out and hugs me and starts talking about peace and love and all this 60s hippie stuff. And he has done these most amazing topiaries, like the size of this stage, and they're I don't know they're abstract forms. So Pearl later became internationally famous, and there are books about him and movies about him. And his young protege, because Pearl's very sick now. His garden it's up in the air about what's going to happen to his garden. But he did have a young protege whose name is Mike Gibson, and he goes by Gibby. Gibby lives in Colombia, and he does that same kind of work, and he's taken this super positive message of what plants and interaction between plants and kids can do. He's taken it all over the country. His career has exploded. So y'all look up Gibby or Mike Gibson too.
Gotta look at bringing them.
Yeah. You can still go to Pearl's Garden. The last time I went, it looked to me like they were following some insurance liability issues, because it all looked great from about 10 feet down, but I don't like with landscapers, you have to pay a whole lot more if you have liability insurance for working on a ladder. So the top was crazy and the bottom was great. So I don't know what will happen to it.
And it's funny when you, like the first time we visited, he's inspired all the neighbors. So when you drove into, I don't know if it's still like that, but when you drove into the neighborhood, everyone else took up topiary.
Yeah.
And
It's like with Christmas lights, and somebody has like a really amazing yard of Christmas lights, then the next year, like you guys think, oh, we can do that.
And I don't-
It's the whole street, and it's this little tiny subdivision, like you would never think we go down this road and then we're like in Dr. Seuss world.
if it's on YouTube, there's I don't know if it's a man named Pearl. It's worth looking up. And I mean, just the way that I think he started a scholarship for C students. And it's one of those things that, you know, sometimes gradings don't really reflect the real ability of someone. You know, he's inspiring. Any other questions? None? Well, it's been, you know, like a huge like energy boost for me to have Jenks here to you know, visit the garden that he helped start with outside of the greenhouse, but also just you know, soaking in what he sees out of the garden. It's always nice to have an outside person, you know, that's in our field, you know, sing our praises, because we try really hard. You know, we're thrilled to continue this education series. I am looking at you know, trying to explore bringing in more speakers at, you know, like Jenks's level, like Carl we had last year. You know, really the response to some of these lectures has shown me that our area can support doing lectures like that. You know, and bringing in, you know, Mike Gibson to come speak, others to come speak. So, you know, we really are looking to grow this, eventually maybe doing a symposium or something like that. But we thank y'all for your support of the gardens and everything that we've been doing over the past couple of years. And there's even bigger things coming in the horizon. So we thank y'all. Plant sale. So remember, next week we'll do the preview of the plant